Okay, everyone, welcome to another random walk down Mill Street. In fact, this is going to be the last one until September, so I'll take a little break. I hope you all enjoy that little break too. We'll come back with some new ideas and new material for September. Today, we're going to be talking about something really kind of small, esoteric. Well, maybe not esoteric is the wrong word, but it would merit maybe a footnote in some book somewhere, or when I write the book of whatever, all the ideas in my head, maybe a paragraph, maybe a footnote. But there are some larger issues that I want to bring out as a result of this small incident or item that I'm going to show you. And it has to do with two things. I'm going to say it now. I'm going to repeat it at the end. There are two things I want you to take away from this tonight's session. The first is our archives. People think of our archives as having lots of material related to early American Jewry, which is absolutely true. And by early, the stuff that people think about, the 17th century, the 18th century, before the American Revolution, colonial America. Yes, there aren't a lot of places that material exists, and one of the material places is our synagogue's archives. But that's just a small part of our archives, and it's not the most robust part of our archives. We have some ledgers, we have some letters, we have a few things. But where our archives really, really shine is the congregational activity during the 19th century. And it's an untapped resource. So I'm going to show you tonight really something very random that I came across some months ago and took a picture of and said, that's interesting. Let me look at that at a later time. And when I started looking at it in advance of this evening, it became more and more interesting. So one thing is an appeal for our archives, that our archives are important, even though they don't get, the attention that it needs for the right reasons that it needs attention. The second thing that I want you to come away with is the lay societies of our congregation, which used to be much more important. Some of them are still very active. The Chebra, the sisterhood are quite active, but there were many other lay-led societies of the congregation which are essentially dormant or not active very much anymore. And if I can encourage any of you to get involved, I'd be happy to facilitate that. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more at the end, and you'll see why. So now, without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. You'll see my PowerPoint is a little bit towards the end of the PowerPoint. We're going to stop sharing that one and go to some items elsewhere. But hopefully, it'll be just as seamless as if they were all in the PowerPoint itself. So here we go. I entitled it with a verse, actually from next week's parasha, Patoach tiftach et yadecha la'achicha la'aniyecha ul'ebyonecha be'artzecha. Should open your hand for your brother, for the poor of your homeland. An appeal to charity. In the context, it's talking about making sure that the poor are taken care of in Israel when you enter the land. And so we were going to talk about a case of charity, or the collection of charity in New York City in the middle of the 19th century from Shearith Israel's archives. So the first thing to see is this paper. These are the papers I found. They're written in beautiful Hebrew. We're going to read them. And as you can see, it's on blue paper that was folded up and addressed to the Parnas, of the trustees of the Parnas and trustees of the Congregation of Shearith Israel. It doesn't have a date, but we can estimate the date a little later on. The next thing that happens is there is essentially a response, not exactly a response directly to this letter, but this is the next page in that folder is this blue piece of paper here, which has to do with giving of charity, and we'll see how it connects. So let's take a look at that letter. I'm going to do my best to read it and translate it. Maybe you'll help me out if I get caught anywhere. but let's see if you can see my screen. If not, I'll just read it to you. And let's see here. Okay. El Atzilei B'nei Yisrael, Rosh Golat Ariel. It starts off with a poem. It's a little hard to translate poems, but Yigdal Hashem Otam B'Yisrael, V'yizku Lir'ot B'Binyan Ariel, B'bo Kol Yisrael Etzion Birnana, Yizku La'alot L'Regel Shalosh Pamim Bashana. So Ish Lefi Ma'alato Yivarech Hashem Ito Oto. So it's a little poem saying that he's addressing it to those who the heads of the exile, that God should make them great and they should see the building of the temple and go to Israel 3 times a year to the rebuilt temple and to give what they can offer. Hashem should bless them. It's a poetic form, so it's hard to give it that same kind of beauty in the translation. Then he says, Halohem Parnasei umanhigei anshe beit hakneset Shearith Israel. The Kehillah Kedosha Sfaradim Yizkeh. I don't know what the whole abbreviation is for. Amen Selah. That's his address in poetry form to the Parnasim, to the board of Shearith Israel. And then he begins his letter. Achenu b'nei Yisrael, my brethren of Israel. Hinei anochi b'tzara gedola ubashivya. I am, my brethren in Israel, I am in great pain. Heyot shabati lakan bechazara me England ba'arom ubchoser kol. I have returned here to New York from England, naked and without anything. Kayadu alakol, like everyone knows. Hayiti etzel b'ni. I had been with my son. Amnam. Zot, it's true. Zot yadua she'av echad yachol lefarnes asara banim. One father can support 10 children. Ve'ein asara banim rotzim lefarnes et avihem. But 10 children don't want to support their father. V'huchrachti la'azov otam. And I had to leave them in England. V'lakachti dira latzmi, or he had to leave his son, and he acquired his own apartment. V'lo yacholti ladorba, but I couldn't live there. Mipnei hakor v'hageshem v'asheleg. I think he means in England. It's cold and it's wet and it's snowy there. V'haraav and famine. He's hungry. Ki lo haya li kimat lechem tsar umayim lachatz. I don't have even a little bread and pressed water, or drawn water. That's a quote, by the way. That some of these little turns of phrases are biblical quotes. That one is from Yeshaya, but he says he doesn't have anything to eat. He has nothing to drink. He couldn't. He tried to. His children didn't want to support him, so he tried to make it on his own, but he couldn't do it. V'gam samani Hashem beit hakele, and God put him in prison. I don't know if he means this literally or if he means that his conditions are so terrible. Ki yesh li kav gadol b'libi ubatzmotai, because I have a lot of pain in my heart and in my bones. Hashedra lo alechem. It shouldn't be for you, and on my spine, and it shouldn't be like that for you. If I go out 10 minutes outside, I then have to go and lie down for an hour or more until I can return to my previous condition. Sim Abrahams. You can ask about this to the doctor, Sim Abraham, period, Samach. That's how he writes it. Im ha'emet oti olo, if I'm speaking the truth or not. Kigam bebeito lo hayiti, because in his house Kigam bebeito lo hayiti kama v'kama shavuot. I was in his house many weeks, mipnei hacholi, because of my illness. And I have no way to support myself. Because of my weakness, ein biyacholti lachtom, it says, but I think it means lachtov. I'm not sure exactly what it says here. Tefillin umuzozot. I can't write tefillin umuzozot. As we'll see, he's a sofer. Al kain ani mevakesh mimalatchem harama. I ask from you honored individuals, bikira. B'keda ub'hishtachavaya, and I'm bowing in front of you. Shetirachamu alai, that you should have mercy on me. You should have pity on me. V'im ein atem yotzim begiri tzu'u begain zekenati. If all the stuff that I wrote before about my condition doesn't appeal to your eyes, you should help me because I'm elderly. If my age doesn't appeal to you, begin torati, because of my Torah, you should help me. I can't really make out what it says there. You don't think that I'm trying to I'm not trying to help my I'm not trying to do something lavish. I just need bread and water. And I'll take whatever you can give. It's more than 20 years since I came here to New York. Mimidat Poland, from Poland. You did many good things for me. Lo yadati siforot lamo. I don't know how to list them all or whatever. Af gam lo yadatem imani hagon lekach. Ve'achshav zeli 20 shana anochi machem hayom vehalachti kol zman b'derech hayashar kayadu lachem. All the 20 years I lived in New York, I did what's proper, as you are aware. Al kain batuach ani b'midat tovechem. I'm sure that in your goodness you will have mercy on me. And I am your servant, the praying to you, lifnechem. Yehuda Tzvi ben Moreno Harav H.L. Michel Goldberg, Sofer Stam H.L, New York. Says that's his letter, and then he adds another thing on the back of it. If you think I just want a handout, no. If you have Torah scrolls that I can fix, or give me some kind of work to do, matovu manaim. Kiritzoni lefarnes et atzmi miyigi'i pi keadua. Like yagia kapecha. He wants to do work for it, as is known. And then he signs his name again, Divrei Yidechem Yilenetzach Yehuda Tzvi Moreno Harav H.L. Michel Goldberg, Sofer Stam, New York. That's the letter he wrote to the Shearith Israel. This is interesting in so many ways because he's writing in Hebrew. He's lived in New York for 20 years. He just came back from England. He went to New York. He went from Poland to New York. He was a sofer in New York. He lived in New York for 20 years. He goes to England. His children don't want to support him anymore. Now he's old and he has pain and he's ill. Comes back to New York. He needs help. And who is he writing to? He's writing to Shearith Israel in Hebrew. He can write English, but he's writing in Hebrew. I don't have a good answer for why that's happening, but it's interesting nonetheless. It's also beautifully written, and his handwriting is very nice. And he gives us his name, Yehuda Tzvi ben H.L. Harav H.L. Michel Goldberg. So we're gonna have to figure out who this is. That's really what we're gonna talk about. Who is Yehuda Tzvi ben H.L. Michel Goldberg, Sofer Stam in New York in the middle of the 19th century? I have, as an aside, this appeals to me on its own because it's so interesting, but also because I want to know everything about how Torah scrolls were written, purchased, where they came from, who fixed them, who wrote them in New York, before the Civil War. So anytime you see something about a sofer in New York, I get interested. So this is something that's why I took a picture of it initially, before I even read through it and understood what it said. And now we'll see the next document, which is right after it. and I'll try to read it for you here. I actually wrote it out. The Committee on Benevolence report to the president. And there's 3 paragraphs. The one that we're going to be interested in is the middle, but I'll just read the whole letter to you. The Committee on Benevolence report to the president the destitute situation of Judah Martinez, wife and 3 children. He has received during the last year $10 from the society. An illness and the inclement season has prevented him from earning any livelihood, and from all appearances, as well as the knowledge of the undersigned of his piety and religious principles, recommend $5 to be given to him. New York, July 7th, 1853. They also report the situation of Rabbi Goldberg, living 63 Mott Street, an old man without family, desiring the consideration of the society, congregates with us, religious and always willing to work. He can have requested coal be sent to him, and recommend $5 appropriated to him. New York, July 7th, 1853. So that's the person that wrote the letter above. This is what he gets: $5 and coal. They also report on the situation of Mrs. Gutman, granddaughter of David Valentine, late Shamas of our congregation. Her husband presumed to be dead. She has 3 or 4 children, herself very sick, and no means of livelihood except the expiation, I'm not sure what that means, of herself and her daughter. They recommend an appropriation according to your judgment. Respectfully submitted, Benjamin Nathan and T.J. Seixas. So what we're going to talk about tonight is who is the person who wrote the first letter, and who are the people mentioned in it. Sim Abrahams, the doctor, and Benjamin Nathan and T.J. Seixas. That's our goal for tonight. And I may not accomplish everything there is to know about all these people, but I think I'll get you get you closer along the way. You'll have a better appreciation of the Shearith Israel and its community in the first half of the 19th century. Okay. Sorry for all these marks, but okay, here we are. This is the answering the question of who wrote that last letter to the Committee of Benevolence, reporting to the president. It was signed by 2 people. One was Benjamin Nathan, the other was Theodore Seixas. This is Benjamin Nathan, this is Theodore Seixas. Benjamin Nathan was one of the famous unsolved murder mysteries in New York City. He was a descendant of the old Nathan family, going back to Simon Nathan, veteran of the American Revolution, and other famous important people in the history of our congregation, among them many presidents of the congregation. And Benjamin Nathan was murdered in 1870. He was a very wealthy man. He had some wealthy children, some of whom were ne'er-do-wells, and there was a lot of suspicion about who killed him. It was never determined. Was it a person who worked in the house? Was it someone who came in from the outside? Was it a family member? No one ever solved the mystery. And so that's interesting on its own, that this letter is written by this man, Benjamin Nathan. The other person on this committee who's recommending these grants of funds is Theodore Seixas. Theodore Seixas is a son of Gershom Mendy Seixas, one of his later children. Seixas had a lot of children before and after the American Revolution. He had 2 wives, not at the same time. And Theodore Seixas is one of his later children, who was a successful businessman. He had a metal trading company, which he ended up selling, moving to Philadelphia, and going then from Philadelphia to South Bend, Indiana in the late 1850s, I think 1857, 1858, where he founds a bank and has an interesting career there as well, together with his brother, David Seixas. These are all interesting people, and I could devote entire classes to each one of them. But those are the people who wrote this letter. And more interestingly, or maybe not more interestingly, but the committee and the society that they're talking about is not Shearith Israel. It's closely connected to Shearith Israel, but it's not Shearith Israel. As you might have seen on the page here, the society that is making those grants and that the committee is recommending grants to be made is called the Hebrew Relief Society. Originally, when it was founded in 1828, it had a very long name, which Dr. Poole describes as a ponderously named society, Society for the Education of Poor Children and Relief of Indigent Persons of the Jewish Persuasion in the City of New York, which Hebrew name was Chebra Chinuch Ne'arim V'Ngezrat Ebyonim. And they were successfully, they raised a lot of money in its founding, so much so that there was then criticism over the next decade that there aren't enough poor people for them to support in New York City at that time, in let's say the 1830s. But by 1854, Poole tells us that even though the society had only 18 members, meaning people who contributed money to the society on an annual basis, only had 18 members, but they supported 4 pensioners, assisted 90 different people with various cash grants, gave coal to 37 families with a total outlay of $1,141 in the year 1854, which is 1 year after the letter that we saw. Okay, so that's the letter that we saw. Now let's double back and take a look at who is mentioned in the letter of the Sofer. So in the letter of the Sofer is mentioned a Dr. Abrahams. Dr. Abrahams, it says Sim Abrahams in the way he wrote it in the Sofer wrote it. If you don't believe me that I'm so sick and I can't work, you can speak to Dr. Sim Abrahams, who I stayed with for weeks and weeks when I was ill. So who is Sim Abrahams? Sim Abrahams, interestingly, I'm gonna see if I can share it with you. Let's see here. Sim Abrahams was a native New Yorker, born in Shearith Israel. His father was a man named Jacob Abrahams, who was the shochet in the very early part of the 19th century. In New York City, in Shearith Israel. I'm just looking for something that I want to show you here. Let's see where it is. Okay. And he was a businessman. He grew up, he made a lot of money. I forget what his business was, but he made a lot of money in his youth or as a young man. And then he essentially, he was unmarried. He decided he had made enough money in business. He didn't need to work anymore. And he moved to Israel, to Jerusalem, and he studies Torah and Talmud and Halakha, and he becomes a rabbi and a mohel. And then he moves back to New York City, and he works as a mohel for 10 years. Giving his services to the New York City community in the 1840s, 1850s, 1840s, I guess. And then, while he's doing this, he becomes a medical doctor and then offers his services at low rates or free of charge to the indigent people of New York City. He is a very charitable person. He's involved in all sorts of charitable things, including the founding of Mount Sinai Hospital and other Jewish interests of the mid and early 19th century in New York. And he is a very highly observant person and very knowledgeable person. And a little biography of him was written posthumously in a letter published in the Occident. That is the newspaper that was published by Isaac Leeser. And I can show you here. Let's see. Can you see my screen? I hope you can see my screen. This is a letter published in the Occident, which is basically the main, the Jewish week of its time. It's dated April 6th, 5616. I don't have that year off the top of my head, but I think it's 1866, maybe something like that. And it's a letter to Dr. Simeon Abrahams of New York about the permissibility of post-mortem examination of the body of a deceased Israelite. Can you do an autopsy on a Jew? And there is a little biography of him because the letter was published after he died. The letter is written by Rabbi Bernard Ilowy. We'll talk about him another time. Very interesting person. But here is a little biography. Dr. Simeon Abrahams was born and reared in New York City and was a member of the Spanish-Portuguese congregation there. In his earlier years and almost up to mature manhood, he was in trade. Then, having acquired ample competency, he retired from business, devoted himself to study. He went to Jerusalem, remained there for a number of years, engaged in the study of Torah, and became so well versed therein that the title of rabbi was bestowed upon him. Ever after, when called to the Torah, he was titled rabbi. He became an expert mohel and officiated as such in New York City for 10 years or more. In 1851, he entered the study of medicine, and 2 years later graduated from the University Medical College and began the practice of medicine in New York City until his demise. He never married. All through his life, he carried himself as a strictly observant Jew and fulfilled all the duties incumbent upon him. He took a rather active part in the discussion of the permissibility of post-mortem examinations, opposing with great vigor the decision of Rabbi Adler of London, who decided it was prohibited because of Nivul Hamet. So just to get that, this is the person that the Sofer, who's writing to Shearith Israel, says, you don't believe me? Ask Simeon Abrahams, your member, this very prominent person. He'll vouch for me that I was very ill and I can't work and I need help. Just as all of these characters are so interesting. So when you read this letter that was written by Ilowy, it's such a fascinating thing that I have to share with you the conclusion, because we are so, I don't know about you, but for me, growing up in the Orthodox world and going to yeshiva, autopsy is not allowed. No autopsy. And that's sort of ingrained in all of us, I think. But that wasn't the case in the 19th century. In fact, this fellow, Rabbi Dr. Simeon Abrahams, says that the chief rabbi of London is wrong and autopsy should be permitted. And he gets support from this fellow, Bernard Ilowy, who is a very, very severely Orthodox rabbi in America, probably, among the most right-wing rabbis of America, Bernard Ilowy is. And he is saying, you're right, Dr. Abrahams, autopsy should be permitted or is permitted. And I just want to read you the concluding, just because it's interesting, the concluding paragraph of his letter here in the Occident from 1866. So let's, you can see it too. So without getting into all the proofs that he already quotes above, I believe to have adduced sufficient proofs, but I could cite 10 times more if required, showing that the men of the Talmud possessed a knowledge of the interior as well as the exterior structure of the human body, which they could never have acquired without dissecting and without anatomical investigations of their own. And there is no passage known to me which could, in the least, justify the presumption that the Jewish physician ever made a distinction between the body of an Israelite or a non-Israelite in this respect. And therefore, I coincide with you in the opinion that dissecting is not only not prohibited to the Jewish surgeon, but that it is right, and he should not neglect any opportunity where he can enter the secret laboratory of nature in order to scrutinize her working within and understand her symptoms from without. Very respectfully, Dr. Bernard Ilowy. That is just shocking in some fashion. Maybe one day we'll talk about that. This is just unbelievable. Anyway, going back to Dr. Abrahams, there is an item in JTS library, a manuscript that it possesses. I don't know if you can see my screen or not, but this is called Sofer Stam H.L. And it is, I mean, you can look at all the honorifics that gives him. Mincha shelucha lahasar hayakar rodef tzedakah v'chesed askan b'mitzvot hachacham morenu habachur kvod harav Shimon bar Yaakov Abrams. This is the book that of circumcision, basically laws of circumcision, that was written for this fellow Dr. Abrams when he went to Jerusalem after he had decided to study. He left New York, came to Jerusalem, and he had this book commissioned. And the Sofer signs his name also. It's a different Sofer from the one from our story. This one, and he Anochi Tolat Yaakov ben Harav Manoach. Sofer Deir Kodesh Yerushalayim. Okay, that's Dr. Abraham. So now we know almost all the characters except for the main one. We know Theodore, Seixas, and Benjamin Nathan, who said to give money to the Sofer, who's Rabbi Goldberg. We know the person that Rabbi Goldberg quotes to or cites to give him a reference to Shearith Israel to get some assistance. But who is Rabbi Goldberg from the Sofer from the early 19th century in America? Let's find out. Okay. The first, there is, if you look him up on Ancestry.com, if you have one of those genealogy access, you will see that he came to America prior to 1837, because in 1837 he applies for naturalization with the intention to become a citizen, and so there is that. In fact, what I can actually show you some of the documents. Let's see here. With the purpose of just showing you his handwriting. Sorry about this. This is what I referred to earlier as not all the things I have made it into the PowerPoint, but I think this will do it here. Yeah. Okay. This, if you can see it, I'm not sure. This is the application of H.L. Goldberg. What was his name? Yehuda Tzvi, Henry Lyon Goldberg, in 1850. Oh, this is a different document, but it's still the same idea. 1851, he is applying to go to Israel. He says he was born in 1791 in Poland, and this is his signature right here. This other stuff writing is the agent, the clerk in the United States, passport office. But this is his signature. It's quite pretty, and also you can tell that he speaks and writes English. He's been in America for a long time. So that is just part of the confusion of why he's writing this Hebrew, probably because he's good at it and it's beautiful. But there you can see his handwriting. And now let's take a look at what we know about H.L. Henry Lyon Goldberg. I have too many windows open for me to figure out where my PowerPoint is now. Okay, here it is. Okay. Everything about this guy is crazy. Okay. So aside from his applying to become a citizen, that's totally normal. The next time we find any news about him is from a court case in 1843. This is from a newspaper report, the New York Daily Herald, 1843. And I have to read it to you because it's so crazy. Henry L. Goldberg versus Shaare Zedek. That is the synagogue. Shaare Zedek still exists today. This was an action of a sumpsit brought by plaintiff to recover $150, which is not an insignificant sum back in 1840. Mr. Leverage was the lawyer for the plaintiff, states the plaintiff's case. He said that in the year 1840, a Jewish congregation occupied a synagogue in Pearl Street, that is Shaare Zedek, that the defendant and 3 others were trustees of the synagogue and managed its financial concern. That on the 12th of April in that year, the plaintiff was elected Shamus at a salary of $100 per annum and a 10% on all collections that he could make for the support of the church. By the way, if my salary were tied to how much I could raise for the synagogue, I would be doing a lot of different things. Okay. The plaintiff continued to perform services for the synagogue up to the September of that year, when the defendant, under some pretense, went to the synagogue one morning during the performance of the religious services, forced the plaintiff from the reading desk into the street, and refused afterward to permit him to perform the duties attached to his office. So they fired him in the middle of praying. They took him out of the synagogue while the service was going on and kicked him out. The plaintiff proved his election and induction that he continued to perform the duties up to the time mentioned, that he was forcibly expelled, as stated by his counsel, and that he had received no salary for the time he had performed the service, and this was the plaintiff's case. Now, it will be borne in mind that the question turned upon the meaning of the word shamus when rendered into English. You can't make this stuff up. On the part of the plaintiff, it was contended and proved that the word shamus in the Hebrew language means reader, rabbi, learned, and reverend, that it is a learned man attached to the law, a teacher of the laws, and a married man, which in Hebrew means a reverend man, whether he has children or not. This interpretation was proved by Mr. Levy, who is a high priest and one of the most learned of the Jewish persuasion in the United States. Okay. The defense stated that the plaintiff, our Henry Lyon Goldberg, was neither a learned rabbi or a married man, that he was elected to fill 1 or 2 menial offices in the synagogue, that inasmuch as he was a Joshuite, I don't know what this means, and maybe I guess he's not a Kohen, he could not be any clerical or spiritual office, and secondly, that he had usurped his authority, which he was not invested, that he had in many instances disobeyed the orders of the trustees, and particularly, and that who knows what this possibly could mean, bringing a large gravestone over 4 tons and placing it against the door of the sanctum sanctorum, which prevented ingress or egress from that part of the synagogue. I have no idea what he did, but he did something that they fired him for. Had something to do with bringing a stone inside the synagogue. And then they have this amazing little thing here. The first witness on the part of the defense was Rabbi Sylvester Ben Hamid Maccabi Jackson. This old gentleman presented a most interesting appearance, and a short description of him will not be uninteresting. He appeared to be about 60 years of age, and the largest part of him in front. His hair and beard were completely silvered, and the latter entirely covered his bosom. His upper Benjamin, I don't know what, I guess that's his hair, was of a modern cut, but the cut of his vest was of very ancient date, and seemed to be after the fashion of those worn in the days of William Penn. His trousers were made in the Turkish style, with the difference that Turkish trousers are closed at the bottom, whereas the rabbis were open. Their upper parts were of enormous dimensions, and it seemed as if it were intended, in case of necessity, that a quantity of provisions might be stowed in them for a journey across the desert. That's the description of the witness. This witness testified that the word shamus was a Chaldaic word, I mean Aramaic, and meant in plain English a servant, a menial worker, hewer of wood and drawer of water, and it was never intended that the plaintiff was to fill any clerical or spiritual employment in the synagogue. Okay. Then they bring a cross-examination. They bring another witness, Mr. Leverage, who's the lawyer for our Goldberg, calls a witness, an Irish witness is called to prove that Shamus was an Irish word and that it had its root in the Irish language. The witness swore that Shamus was an Irish word, that about 150 years ago an English gentleman came to Ireland and he had run away from the Battle of Boyne. You can't make this stuff up. It's such a crazy article. And that person was called, that person who had run away from the battle was called Shamus Achokas. And the last witness was an ignoramus who knew nothing at all about foreign tongues or English. That witness underwent severe cross-examination. The next witness was a Scotch gentleman called on behalf of the defendants to rebut the testimony of the Irishman, who swore that Shamus was pure Irish. Okay, that's about enough. I'll get to the disposition of the case. But you see how crazy this case must have been, about what happened to this fellow. Several other witnesses were examined to minor points of the case, but their testimony was of no importance. At 9 o'clock, the case was closed. His Honor charged the jury at length, reviewed the testimony of the witnesses for both parties, told the jury that it was an action for breach of contract, and if upon the evidence they come to the conclusion that the defendant had violated Goldberg's contract and expelled him from his office without just cause, they should find a verdict for the plaintiff. On the other hand, if Goldberg had acted improperly, then there was cause, and then they should find for the defendant. The jury retired, shortly returned a verdict for the plaintiff, $140. Goldberg, the Sofer. His first thing does not start well. His first job in New York is a shamus of Shaare Zedek. They fire him. There is a lawsuit. He wins the lawsuit. But that is not a good start for his career. Let's see what happens to Goldberg later on. Okay, next thing that happens to Goldberg. Henry Lyon Goldberg. That is who we're talking about. The next time we hear about Henry Lyon Goldberg is, at least publicly, and I could find in research, was 1850. So it's 10 years later. Let's see if we can you see my, this is, there were a bunch of quotes that I was able to find. This one was from the Tri-Weekly Commercial newspaper in North Carolina, October 24, 1850. Curious bigamy case. Jacob Meyer, a Jew who was married in Baltimore to Caroline, his wife, about 9 years ago, was arrested in New York on Thursday for bigamy in marrying Mary Stein, a pretty German girl, on the Sunday previous. Himself and Caroline, that's the first wife, had been divorced, remarried, and divorced again, as they thought, by a Jewish priest named Henry L. Goldberg, who also married Meyer to the German girl. The priest, Goldberg, pleaded ignorance of our laws, and no complaint was taken against him. So this, in very short form, tells you a little bit. There was a fellow named Meyer who had come from Germany to Baltimore. He got married to his wife named Caroline. They were married for 9 years. They moved to New York. They get divorced. I guess it wasn't going so well. After 9 months, they get remarried. The person who divorced them was this fellow Goldberg. They get remarried 9 months later, but that seems to have lasted very, very short time, like a month or less than a month or a week, before they realize that this is a bad idea. And Goldberg writes them a get, and they are divorced a second time. Then this fellow Meyer marries a German girl, presumably a Jewish person, named Stein, and Goldberg marries them. What they didn't do was get divorced civilly. So he's a bigamist. And I am sure that this was brought to the attention of the authorities by the first wife. I mean, I don't have any proof of it, but I'm pretty sure that's what happened here. because he divorced her with Goldberg and didn't follow any of the laws of the state. But this was very embarrassing. I showed you an article that was very short and just a summary coming from way far from New York. But New York newspapers covered it more extensively, and it was quite embarrassing for the Jews. So much so that in the newspapers of the time, such as the Occident and the Asmonean, which are the big Jewish newspapers of the time, large articles are written about the laws of divorce, and decrying the fact that there are people issuing Jewish divorces who don't know halacha and don't know the rules and certainly don't know the secular rules, and there should be a Beit Din in New York City to handle all of these cases. Big articles written by Mayor Isaacs, who's the rabbi of Shaare Tefillah, and others in advocating that there should be a central authority in New York that will issue gittin, and not this guy. And Goldberg gets thrown under the bus. They accuse him of not being a rabbi, of not knowing halacha, of not knowing anything, of taking money he'll do anything for money. And his name really gets muddied very, very greatly. Let's see if I can show you one of those articles or one of those documents. Let's see here. Well, I don't have it. I don't have it ready, but you'll take my word for it that they roll him through the mud, and they say that he doesn't know anything. He's not a rabbi. He's a nobody. He shouldn't be issuing gittin. He shouldn't be marrying anybody. And you can tell how embarrassed the rabbinate is of this case, and that it made national headlines of bigamy in the Jewish community because the rabbi didn't know what he was doing. That is Henry Lyon Goldberg. Okay. And the last time we see any mention of him is really our letter, where he is elderly and not well, and he asks for help, and Shearith Israel gives him help. And Shearith Israel does not make any mention of him having done anything improper. They help him. I think there's actually, I don't have it for you. I think he actually fixes Torah scrolls for Shearith Israel on occasion. I saw some payments to him and some letters that are written to him about fixing Torah scrolls. So they do the best they can to help him. I wonder if he goes to England to escape all the nastiness of what happened here with the bigamy case. Don't know. But clearly he was having a hard time. After that, he was having a hard time making a living, and he tries other things, and he comes back to America completely in destitute, and Shearith Israel has to help him. He is buried. He dies in 1854. He is buried in Shearith Israel Cemetery in Queens, in like the second row. So he dies a member of Shearith Israel, even though he is a Polish Sofer operating in New York City for the general community. He is a member of Shearith Israel, and he is under the care of Shearith Israel at the end of his life. So that is the story of this letter and the appeal for funds and the payment of funds for support of this rabbi. And now I have a little appeal for you as well, because the Hebrew Relief Society still exists. It's basically dormant, but it exists on paper. It has a bank account with a small amount of funds. And I think if there's anybody out there who is interested, it could be revived. And there are people who come to Shearith Israel, maybe with not as colorful stories as Henry Lyon Goldberg, but who need help and could be helped by such an organization. Currently, when that happens, we use the rabbi's discretionary fund and things get done. But there is a going concern that has been in existence since 1828, and it would be a shame for it to just die off and be defunct. So if you want to be involved in this organization that has helped people since 1828 until relatively recent times, let me know, and you can be on the board of the commissioners of the Hebrew Relief Society. And that's it. So I hope you enjoyed. If anyone has any questions, you can feel free to ask. Oh, I have to let you talk. I forgot that you're all muted. So that's the story of Henry Lyon Goldberg. Hope you enjoyed. Okay. I will not be seeing you for several weeks. It will be I'll be back at the end of August, and so I think our first class will be in September. I haven't even looked at the calendar. We have the holidays coming up then. So stay tuned for when the class will resume. Okay. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.